Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another new episode of The Lager Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm joined again by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA, me at Ben Dubose. We're chatting today on Wednesday, November 13th. Rockets are back at action tonight for the first of two straight home games against the LA Clippers. James Harden leading the way, also the return of Redacted, that's Kevin Porter Jr., to Houston for the first time since leaving the organization about a year ago. The second one of those two games against the Clippers on Friday night, that will also be the opening game of group stage play for the NBA Cup. Both of those games will obviously count towards the regular season as well. And as far as the regular season, let's be honest, there's a lot to like here. The Rockets are currently 7-4 on the year. They're in the number 5 spot in the Western Conference. They've got the number 7 net rating. They're number 3 on defense, number 16 on offense. We said last week when we were recording that there was a lot underneath the hood to be encouraged by, even though the Rockets were barely above 500 at 4-3 at the time. And we said that if those trends continued, they should and needed to start putting some distance between themselves and 500 during what's a fairly manageable portion of the schedule. Good news is that they've done exactly that. They've won 3 of 4 over the past week since we recorded. They've won 6 of their last 8 overall. They're now 3 games over 500, and the only loss was on the road to a really good Oklahoma City team. Again, lot to like. And I think they should be favored in both of these games against the Clippers, although the Clips are above 500 themselves. They do have James Harden, so it shouldn't come as a shock if they get one of those two games. To me, as long as the Rockets get a split and they come out of this week with a winning homestand, they already won the opener Monday against Washington. That's the opener of a 3-game homestand. If you come out with a winning homestand and at least 3 games over 500, I think we should feel pretty good about things. So, as far as today's show, it's going to be a little bit different. Here at the top, we are going to talk micro as far as what we've learned the last few games since we last recorded. But for most of our show, we're going to be talking macro and basically make this unofficial Giannis Antetokounmpo trade season spectacular. Because the whispers have been out there for a while, and now with the Bucks starting 2 of 8, or 2-8, and near the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings, I think we've gotten to a point to where it would be foolish if we didn't at least acknowledge the elephant in the room. Keep in mind, Giannis turns 30 years old next month. The Bucks have got an aging roster around him, and they don't really have the financial flexibility or trade assets to really reshape that roster. It's got tons of veterans, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Damian Lillard. If they are on the downhill side, there's not a whole lot they can do to change that. And here in Houston, we know all too well what that can mean, because on paper, it looks kind of similar to the situation the Rockets found themselves in this time 4 years ago with a 30-year-old James Harden. And it's not just us speculating. Bill Simmons is the latest national voice over at The Ringer, his latest pod. He actually listed both the Rockets and the Nets as the 2 teams that he thinks would be the frontrunners for Giannis on the trade market if he becomes available. So there's definitely a lot to unpack as far as the various considerations at play and whether Rafael Stone should or shouldn't go down that road. We'll get into that, and quite frankly, this will probably be one of our longer episodes because there's a lot to get into. But I want to lead off by talking about what's actually happening on the court these days at Toyota Center, and again tonight when the Rockets tip off against the Clippers. Because that part is not speculative. The Giannis stuff, it's intriguing. We know the Rockets could use a consolidation trade. They have the assets. We've talked about it. The question for this team, do they have, or will they be able to develop the alpha on a championship team from this core 7, or do they have to go externally to get it? That's where a big trade for a Giannis could come into play. We've also speculated about guys such as Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell the last few months. All of that can wait until the trade deadline and more than likely next offseason. For the most part, I think our focus should be on what's happening on the court right now, because this is a good basketball team as is. Are they a championship contending team? Probably not. But 7-4, there's a lot to like here. Even with a relatively weak schedule, I don't think there's any Rockets fan, if you had been offered a deal 3 weeks ago when the regular season was tipping off on October 23rd, hey, after 11 games, would you take 7-4 coming off a 41-41 year with all these young pieces and trying to integrate Tari Eason and Steven Adams? Or would you play out the string in hopes that maybe you're a game or two better than 7-4, but also you obviously could be worse? I think pretty much all of us would have taken 7-4 when you consider where the Rockets are as an organization. So again, that's not to say there isn't a case for Giannis or a bigger move down the line. There is. I don't think this team is a championship contender just yet, but the trajectory overall is very good, and there's a lot to like these days about what's going on the court at Toyota Center. So let's start by putting the initial focus on the product itself, especially now that we're in season. The stuff with Giannis, the trade market, that's likely months or even years away. So, Paolo, I'll let you deliver the opening monologue, if you will, on this. I've been doing it the last couple of episodes, so I'll let you start off as far as general observations. What has stood out to you since our last pod? What's your state of the Rockets on this Wednesday, November 13th?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to be breaking any news here, but I think the biggest storyline has to be, I guess I'll split it into two, because now that we've played Sengun, he also becomes a massive storyline, whatever happens with him. But I'll start with Amen Tari. It's just insane levels of activity. It's like, listen, steals and blocks are like the counting stats, right? That you easily connect defense. But it's not just that. It's that they convert like the pressure that they get to actual turnovers and to actual block shots so much more often than your typical, defensive specialists. And it's not like they're selling out for these, insane stats. It's that they play good defense, they pressure the ball, and they combine. It's actually very unique in the way that they combine the physical tools with the attitude necessary to play that style of basketball, with the actual skill to do it without fouling. And I think that's, obviously, it's been said that the NBA is trying to allow more physicality, and that obviously helps the way this team wants to play. But it's just insane how much different the game becomes, especially to a team that, struggles with half-court offense. You would probably be right in saying that without Alperen Sengun, this team has no half-court offense. Jalen Green, I know we'll talking about it later, but Jalen Green has regressed back to the worst true shooting of his career so far this season. He's at like 52%, and I know you can look at it and say, hey, the defense has improved, and in the clutch he's come through, but my previous point remains, which is half-court offense doesn't work, and a lot of the ways that we are staying in these games and a lot of the ways that we're holding leads in these games is because we are generating a lot of offense just based off of how good our defense is, especially when those guys are on, and how they can convert good defense through 17 seconds of a possession or sometimes earlier on into actual turnovers. And I think it's been done to the Rockets, and we've seen the Rockets do it to a lot of teams. And nowadays in the NBA, with the new, looser officiating, ball pressure seems to be, the way to go on defense. So getting ball hawks and being, all over your opponent all the time seems to be the way, because your typical, kind of offensive hub, like one-man shows, are no longer as mechanical. I guess I'll call it mechanical when generating offense. If you know what I mean. When we had James Harden, it was very easy. The same thing worked every single time. And if you ball pressured a lot, James would just be insanely quick to make the pass out of the double team. Or in other cases, he would just punish you anyways and go through you and take that contact to and he'd get the call. Obviously, Steph Curry and the entire Warrior system made it tough for you to, because of all the constant movement, for you to be as physical without being called for away from the play foul and stuff like that. But I think all in all, we're shifting into, I think, a different era of the NBA. And these guys are just making the most out of it. And if you guys remember back before the season and throughout the history of this podcast, I've always said that Tari Eason is, if not the second most important player on this team. And he's showing it. And not only that, I guess everybody will talk about the defense. And with Amen, it's true as well, but I'll talk about Tari first. The offense has really gotten, a lot better. Obviously, he's not breaking guys down off the dribble, but he is driving. His handle looks a lot more secure, and his ability to finish through contact and finish at the rim seems to be a lot better than it used to be. And I'm not going to say his shot looks a lot better because it looks mostly the same, but I think it's going in a little bit better than it used to. And I feel like whatever we get at Tari Eason 3, it's actually a good shot. I guess I'll say that I'm a bit disappointed that he's not making his free throws. I mean, if I remember correctly, he used to be like an 80% free throw shooter when he was the sixth man of the year back at LSU. And I thought that was like I think free throw percentage is a really underrated aspect of most prospects, especially guys that play the front court positions, because it's nowadays taken for granted that people call free throws free points, but it's actually not 3 points for a lot of guys. And I guess I'll use that improvement from Tari offensively to move it over to Amen, who offensively is on the opposite trajectory as far as free throw percentage goes. He's up at 74%, which if you watched him at Overtime Ignite, you would take that free throw percentage for his career if you could right now. And if someone offered to you 74% from the free throw line from Amen Thompson for the rest of his career, and on the other side, you're kind of need to not go below that either, I think everybody would take that.
For sure. Overtime Ignite, by the way. But go on.
Yeah, sorry. And so that's a great development. And the other one is that he feels a lot more comfortable to me. Obviously, he's turned the ball over a few times, but he feels a lot more comfortable to me when driving to the rim at using his body, his speed, and his IQ of finding other guys as threats to open up driving lanes for himself. And I think he's shown more and more flashes as time's gone on. And so I think it's a better time than ever to buy into the upside that everybody was tantalized by Amen Thompson. And I guess speaking of my second biggest storyline, which is Alperen Sengun's back. I mean, there's no two ways about it. He hasn't been making, the level of threes that he was earlier in the season, but that always feels a bit fluky. And so I'd much rather have him be back to being the post-up monster that he was last season and maybe take a step back from those threes than have him scoring more points on his threes and that be something that just comes and goes. So, I mean, I think the last game is the biggest indictment on how important he can be for this offense for the exact reasons that we mentioned last pod, which is this team cannot play half-court defense, and this team down the stretch, they've been calling on Joan to be the closer, but truly, if you slow the game down, the closer should be Alperen Sengun, and he showed that, and he kept the team afloat against both the Pistons and the Wizards. So Alperen Sengun's back. Tari and the men are still on the rise. I'll leave it to you if you want to touch on the entire argument of should one of them be starting over Jabari Smith. I made my peace with it. I talked about it last pod. I don't even have much to add on top of that. I'll say that it was nice to see Reed Shepard get some more reps in the game that Fred VanVleet was not on. And it felt like he was a bit more confident getting to his mid-range shots and handling the ball. So that's trending up. Cam Whitmore being kind of relegated to the G League is something that it wasn't completely unexpected. We talked about it on the pod for the season. One of those two guys was going to eventually have to spend some time in the G League just because it's just not feasible to play. It was never feasible to play both of them from a rotation perspective. We even thought that some of them may lose minutes to vets like Aaron Holiday, Steven Adams, who's been injured, like Jeff Green. At times we thought that perhaps he could play. They haven't been playing much, and still it's been a minutes crunch for those two. So that's not surprising to me at all. Jalen, obviously, on a down note, Fred VanVleet had one really nice game against the Spurs, but it was short-lived. So
he had a good one against the Knicks too, and then I don't think you've touched on Jabari yet. That's consistently still a mess, but
yeah, I mean, just I didn't want to touch too much on Jabari and the entire.
Yeah, we talked about him last week.
Because we just made such we were early on that. We made such a big deal of it like a week early, and now everybody's talking about it. But yeah, I'm not. You guys know that I was Banchero was back in the draft. I'm not gonna go back and pull receipts, but I mean, we just need him to make his threes and be able to play some switchable defense. We're not asking for much at this point. Right? We're not asking him to become the second coming of KD that some people thought he could become. I don't think anybody, at least on our end, we ever really bought into it. But man, he can be such a valuable player just if he shoots well. I think even if the defense doesn't get that much better, but if he shoots well, he can be such a valuable player. But yeah, I think that's mostly. I know I want to touch on something. We are on I think 52 win pace, and I feel like people are a little bit too down on the team for a team that's on a 52 win pace. I think everybody would take 48 wins for this season, and so 52 is definitely good. I'd like to urge people again that this, to me, the Western Conference does not look, even though compared to how weak the Eastern Conference is, obviously it's a tough conference, but the teams that are above the Rockets don't feel as untouchable as they did last season. And especially with Chet Holmgren being out for a while now, we'll see what happens with the Thunder. It'll be a lot more on Shea and Jalen Williams' shoulders to carry the load offensively because of what they're going to lose defensively, not having Chet and not having Hartenstein. So they don't seem as untouchable as they once were. And my last point is on the Clippers, because I've watched probably more Clippers basketball than I should have. And listen, I just don't see how they can beat us. Yes, it's James Harden. We have some of the best on-ball defenders in the league. They are a three-headed, I can't call it monster because they aren't a monster, but you have on-ball defense on James Harden, which I trust Amen Thompson to do. You have Norman Powell, who is their only weapon. If he's hot, it's going to be tough to stop. But if you stick one of our either Tari or Ahmed, the one who isn't on Harden, on him, they'll give him a tough fight. Doesn't have necessarily the best handle in the league. It's just more of a catch and shoot or growing off of screens and that type of stuff. And then they have Zubac, who's been, kind of being a little bit of a hub. Their entire offense revolves around Zubac and how Harden can feed him and how he can create advantages and then spray it out to their multiple role players. So I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but I don't believe Kevin Porter Jr. is coming up with the roof. And that I'm not going to wood, but
we probably just insured it. But go on.
But I will say that there's these two are two, even though they're 6 and 5. To me, these are must-win.
They'll be favored.
When we match up so well against them, like Sengun should not have much trouble defending Zubac, at least in
fair. There's someone you can easily stick Sengun on. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So, just wanted to finish off the little opening, current state of the team segment with we really should beat the Clippers twice. I think they're a really good match for us.
And I think the Friday game in particular, the Rockets are the type of team that'll probably be disproportionately excited by the NBA Cup and the opportunity to make a bit of a run, because we talked about in the offseason, this is a fairly manageable group that they're in. And so if you want to actually make it out of group stage play, a home game against the Clippers is probably one that you need to win. Clippers a little more veteran-laden. I know they're not a true title contender. Well, I don't know if they are, even if Kawhi Leonard comes back in peak Kawhi form, but they're certainly not with Kawhi out injured, but they're still veteran-laden, and I don't think they're the type of team that's going to be nearly as excited about a potential cup run as a younger group like the Rockets that has, 6 guys in their core 7 currently in the playing rotation and all healthy. So I think that's the type of game that could give the Rockets a little bit of a bump just in terms of the intensity they play with relative to the Clippers, especially with that game in Houston as well. So I think the Friday one in particular is one I've got circled as one that I think the Rockets will probably play pretty well and have a lot of juice for, especially on the defensive end of the floor. And for me, that's where I keep coming back to when I think of, my 30,000-foot view, state of the team, thoughts 3 weeks into the season. The defense is real. I don't know if they're truly going to be top 3 all season long in terms of defensive rating, But even if they're top 5, top 6, let's say top 20% of the league, that gives them such a margin for error because defense, rebounding, that travels, especially when you have the depth that the Rockets do. Individual players are going to have peaks and valleys, especially when it comes to shooting and scoring, but the level of length and the way the Rockets can attack you with waves of versatile defenders. Obviously, Tari and Amen are the head of the snake in that regard, but Dillon can still defend at a very high level. Jabari can. I think if a shot ever gets going, you'll see his intensity on defense pick up even more. Sengun, one thing that's not being talked about enough, his defensive metrics have really picked up this year. He's defending the rim in terms of the advanced metrics a lot better than what they showed him doing in the first 3 seasons of his career. This is a good defensive team. Steven Adams should continue to get in better shape the more he plays. So there's a lot to like for the Rockets on that end of the court. And we knew going into this year, even though the Rockets had a 41-41 baseline based on their record last season, most of the peripherals suggested that the Rockets should have won 45 or 46 games, but they underachieved. I think, it's understandable as to why. They had been so bad the previous 3 years, and so going from one of the worst teams in the league to just competitive, that's a big jump in and of itself. So without having much past experience to draw upon, especially at a collective team level, it can be tough to close out close games. They let a few games slide, especially early in the season, that perhaps they wouldn't have and won't this year as they get more experience. And so that was one of the cases for optimism as I saw it going into the year. The fact that, look, last year's team was actually, by the metrics, closer to 45 or 46 wins, and you're adding Tari Eason, who's one of your best players thus far, only played 20 of your 82 games last year, basically, and was limited by injury at that. Now, not only is he playing incredibly well on both ends of the floor, but he's also playing back-to-backs. He had a ton of energy, which I thought was a fabulous sign on night 2 of a split back-to-back. So you add Tari Eason and Steven Adams to a team that was 41-41 last year, but had the peripherals of a team that was probably mid-40s, and it's a younger team, so most of your guys should get better organically just from having more reps in the NBA, more time playing together, second year of Ime Udoka, and so on and so forth. I think we're at a point now where, assuming health, the baseline for the Rockets, it's not 41-41. The baseline for this team is at least the mid-40s, in my opinion. And the one question for me was whether the defense would hold, and if, with Tari Eason back and Amen Thompson year 2, that would sort of give them the additional depth. And the phrase I keep going back to is margin of error, so that if guys get hurt or if guys underperform for one reason or another, they could withstand it. And that's exactly what's happened to this point. And, they haven't even really figured out the clutch time offense yet. I mentioned that being a reason I think they underperformed their expected win-loss record a little bit last year. But, you could certainly say the first week of the year was a concern because there were games they couldn't close out against the Hornets and the Spurs. Well, they didn't lead that Spurs game. They lost in San Antonio, but, they got back within a point late and couldn't find a way to get the decisive bucket. But then they won a coin flip game in Detroit on Sunday, and they didn't even really generate great offense. The buckets they got in crunch time when they flipped what was a deficit with about 4 minutes to play into a win were on Tari Eason and Alperen Sengun crashing the offensive glass and getting putbacks. So when you can defend and rebound at the level that they do, and I think they out-rebounded the Wizards by 24, just a staggering number, then that buys you so much time to let the rest of the roster and the rest of your playing style take shape. Because I think, we talk about how great Sengun looks now. Yeah, last pod, we were talking about how for most of the start to the year, he'd struggled. And Jalen had been the guy the first week and a half or so of the season that was carrying the team. Now it's sort of flipped. There's still, especially on the offensive end of the floor, because there's so many mouths to feed, there's a lot of sort of feeling out that's going on in terms of when guys feel it's their time, how do they slide into a supporting role, who does Ime trust for that closing lineup? Because up until 8 days ago, the Rockets weren't using Sengun in the closing lineup. Now it's like he's a mainstay again, and he looks like a potential all-star. So there's still a lot of feeling out, especially on the offensive end of the floor, in terms of guys figuring out where they fit, the Rockets figuring out where should I run offense through, how do I best optimize certain things. And with a younger team, that's going to take some time throughout the year to sort of fill out. Also, the shooting stuff. Jabari has been a disappointment, but I don't want to overreact to a bad 11-game stretch when he shot about 36.5% from three on decent volume in 80 games last season. He is going to shoot better. I don't know if he's going to get back to where he was a year ago. I hope he does. But at a bare minimum, he's going to get better. And that's what really encourages me. That's why I'm not going to focus on individuals too much. In terms of looking at any individual player, especially the offensive end of the court, it takes time for the sample to normalize. Again, through the first 11 games, we've seen Alperen Sengun have a bad sample and then a great sample. Jalen Green sort of the reverse. He started with a great one, and it's been, not so good the last 5 or 6 games, with perhaps the defense being the lone exception. Fred VanVleet's had some great shooting games. He's had a lot of really bad ones. Jabari Smith has been the only guy that's been consistently bad, but hopefully that means he's due for an uptick. I think you've got to get to 20, 40 games before you can really start having a good handle on individuals and what the trajectory of their season is going to be like, and are they going to take the next step or not? And sometimes it can take even longer than that. Obviously, it took until March of last season before we fully saw what Jalen Green was turning into in year 3, or at least incorporating that into our analysis of Jalen as a player. So I'm not going to look too deep at them individually just yet. We can note the peaks and valleys, but at the end of the day, none of them have been so catastrophically bad or otherworldly good that we would say the entire outlook is transformed relative to the start of the year. We're not there yet. But I will say that collectively, you can get a sense, even this early, for the overall talent base of the team. And that's what, to me, is really standing out through this stretch. And, it's not nothing. After this game tonight, they'll be at 12 games of 82. That's 15% of your sample. That's not insignificant. And so some nights, some guys are hot. Other guys will pick it up on other nights. And so that's going to vary throughout the year. But I do think that even in 12 games, you can see the totality of the talent base. And do you have enough to offset a bad night for somebody with a good night for somebody else? That's the kind of thing that even in a 10 to 12 game sample, you can see. And in my opinion, the Rockets clearly do. And I think that's what's really standing out to me. When they defend at this level, some stats I put on my Twitter page earlier today at Ben Dubose. So Rockets scoring below 110 points, they are 5-3 this year. Last year, they were 10-18. They are 4-0 this year, making below 10 three-pointers. Last year, they were 3-8. They won against the Wizards with 5 made three-pointers. The last time they won a game with 5 or fewer threes was March 2017, before Tillman Fertitta was the owner. This year, they are number 27 out of 30 teams in three-point shooting. That can get better. They may not be an elite shooting team, but Fred VanVleet is going to shoot better. Jabari Smith Jr. is going to shoot better. Reed Shepherd, who is now nearly 40% on threes, is going to get to be a bigger part of the rotation in the offense as the year moves along and he develops. That's someone they did not have a year ago. I don't think they're an elite shooting team, but they're not going to be near the bottom, I don't think. They'll improve a little bit. And they are 7-4, even not shooting well. I went back and looked. Someone pointed out that, they started 6-3 a year ago. They did, but when they had that 6-3 start with that 6-game winning streak, mostly at Toyota Center, and there was some fortuitous, scheduling luck in there. The Kings didn't have De'Aaron Fox for those games. I think the Lakers were missing at least one of their big guys. The Rockets were actually shooting 10th in the league on three-point percentage during that 6-3 start. And that was about, in my opinion, as well as they could realistically be expected to shoot. If anything, that was going to go down a little bit, and it did. This year, starting 7-4, they are at number 27 of 30 teams. It's certainly not going to get worse, and I think it should get a little bit better. So if anything, the 7-4 start can be improved upon. We know the games they let slip away. You look at their schedule, 2 of the losses you don't feel bad about at all. You lost to the Thunder and the Warriors. Those are the 2 top teams in the league by net rating, and one of them was in overtime. The only losses you feel bad about are those in the first 4 days of the year to the Hornets and the Spurs, and those were coin-flip games that you didn't shoot well in. They're starting to close games better. Sengun is proving that he can be relied upon, and he can increasingly become the linchpin of your offense in those settings, I think. You won a coin flip game at Detroit, a better Detroit team, so it's not like you're losing every close game. There's a lot to like here. And so that doesn't guarantee you anything, But I do think it shows you, especially when you look at the success they're having and the shot luck is not going their way, it tells you that it's pretty sustainable. And, knock on wood, hopefully there's no injuries, because if you have a, injury to Amen or Tari, that could dramatically change things in a hurry. But they are deeper than most teams, so hopefully they can withstand that better than a lot of teams they're competing with in the West. I just think that unlike a year ago when, it felt like they were a little bit ahead of schedule and maybe they're a little bit fluky with the shot luck, this year they're not having any shot luck at all. But the defense, the rebounding, it's so damn good that they are 7-4 through 11 games anyway. And so for me, it just confirms that 500 is no longer, assuming health, the baseline for what you should expect of this team until proven otherwise. They're not a contender just yet, but I would say mid-40s is where I think a fair expectation is. And maybe they overachieve that, but I think the scenarios where they regress or fall back to 500, assuming health, I don't think you should expect that anymore. This team should definitely be playing postseason basketball and perhaps even getting into the playoffs and even threatening to win a series, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there. But just so much to like from the first 3 weeks of this season when you look at it overall, because they can definitely play a lot better, and yet they are still 7-4. And so I think we should definitely celebrate how far they've come. Last little micro point I want to get to before we turn to Giannis. You mentioned the Reed and Cam Whitmore situation, which we referred to in the offseason. I've seen some confusion on that point on social media. Look, Cam Whitmore did not join the rotation last year, even though he had some flashes, until Tari Eason was lost for the year in early January. That's when Cam got a full-time role. And when Cam started this year, Tari was still on a minutes limitation. You look back, he was playing 15 minutes a game the first couple of games just to prove that his leg could handle it. Now that you are scaling up Tari to where they can let him play 30 minutes if the situation warrants it, if that's what they need, and he's playing worthy of those minutes. Same with the men, and that's why I don't think that they're desperate to potentially move Jabari out of the starting lineup. No, if you can get, Tari and men, close to 60 combined minutes if you need it off the bench, then why do you desperately need to make a change? If anything, maybe you need Tari and men to anchor those bench units, as you argued in last week's pod, Paolo. To get Tari to the minutes that he needs, or I guess the combination of Tari and men, something had to give, and Cam was the obvious guy who would be the odd man out because, again, he only got his role when Tari was lost last year. I've seen some saying, well, why has Reed moved ahead of Cam in the pecking order? Well, first off, I think Reed's shooting is something that this team needs, as we were just describing. To this point, they're number 27 in the league from three-point range. And secondly, Reed is replacing, for the most part, Aaron Holiday. You need a second ball handler. You need a second floor general shooter type for when Fred VanVleet isn't out there. And, Fred missed Monday's game with hamstring tightness. We'll see what his availability is in the next few games. But I think that could be a sign that, you need to be, even if it's not a big deal, you need to be mindful of the minutes. You need another smaller, shifty ball handler type, which Aaron Holiday was last year. And Reed is replacing that to this point in this year with Aaron. That's sort of the third string option if Fred's out, which he was on Monday. With Cam, it's a different body type. It's a different player archetype. You can't drop him into that role. So it's not so much that the Rockets are prioritizing Reed ahead of Cam, even though I do think Reed's skills do play a little bit better with what this team needs. It's also just the way the team was put together last season, the rotations. Reed is a drop-in replacement for Aaron Holiday. As opposed to Cam, he didn't have a spot when this rotation was fully healthy a year ago. He only got his spot due to injury. So my guess is that at some point this year, there's going to be similar injuries, hopefully not as severe as the one that Tari had a year ago, but, Cam will get his opportunities to come back to the NBA. But if there's not a spot for him to play consistent rotation minutes, it's better for him to play in the G League and develop, especially, just 20 years old, one of the youngest guys in this draft class and as raw as he is, than to sit on the bench and do nothing. He needs to play. And so it's not really an indictment. It's just there's not really a role for him right now. And, there doesn't have to be. Part of it, too, we'll get into it with Giannis, but there's the potential for a consolidation trade down the line. And so it could be that Cam is one of those guys that's waiting in the wings and then takes on a larger role, be it at this year's trade deadline, next offseason, whenever the big trade, if one does happen, happens. And then you have Cam waiting to take on a bigger role at that time. I don't think he's going to do nothing until then. There are going to be injuries. You're not going to be healthy for an entire 82-game season. We're already seeing Fred VanVleet struggle with some things. Jock Landale as well. So there's going to be opportunities for Cam at some point. I just think right now, Reed has a more clear path to rotation minutes with the way this team was built. And it's not anything against Cam in particular. It's just Reed is an easier drop-in replacement for the limited minutes that are available right now. So I think, those are my long-winded state of the team thoughts. Anything else that you want to mention, Paolo, before we turn our attention to Giannis?
No, I think everything's covered.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's transition to Giannis for the remainder of this show, because this is fascinating. Again, Bucks are off to a 2-8 start, although in a bad Eastern Conference, as you laid out, that's basically just 3 games back of the Pacers for the number 3 seed. There's the Celtics, there's the Knicks, and there's not a whole lot else when it comes to, legitimate contenders. We'll see what happens with, the Cavaliers, excuse me. God, I forgot about the 12-0 Cavs. But yeah, you've got the Cavs, the Celtics. I think the Knicks will eventually emerge from the pack. And, we'll see what happens with the Sixers as Embiid gets healthy, Paul George. They have the talent to be better, a lot better than the 2-7 they are right now. Time will tell. But regardless, even if the East expands from the 2 elite teams that it has now to maybe 3 or 4, it's not going to be anywhere near the Western Conference. So the point is, even if the Bucks are well below 500, there's a pathway for them to easily get back into not just the play-in, but the playoff mix with all the mediocrity in the East, especially with Paolo Banchero lost for a few weeks with that oblique injury. Orlando was one of the teams that I think you could have made an argument for prior to the year, taking a leap into, if not the top tier, maybe that secondary tier now with Paolo out, and who knows if he'll even be himself when he comes back. We saw how the oblique limited Dillon Brooks last year. I think while 2-8 feels disappointing for a team that has, a 2-time MVP and Giannis and Damian Lillard and all these veterans, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, it would not take a lot for them to be relevant. And so because of that, I really want to stress that while the Giannis trade speculation is intriguing for the obvious reasons, we've talked about the Rockets needing a him, and this is a 2-time MVP. He's probably slipped a little bit defensively from when he was at his peak, late 2010s, earlier this decade, but still a 30-plus point, 10-plus rebound per game guy. He's just 29 years old, not even 30 until next month, so it's not like he's anywhere near being washed, even if there's been a tiny bit of slippage. Still clearly, what would you say, Paolo? I think he's top 5. Worst case, he's top 7 or 8, but I think he's still top 5.
Yeah, to me, he's, in just a terrible situation, and I think he's still an MVP candidate.
Yeah, I think he's still
for another 3-4 years.
And so guys like that, especially as they get into their 30s, want to contend. Now, maybe his situation is a little different. With the Rockets and Harden a few years ago, James had not won a championship. So I think there was a little more pressure on him. Giannis has been with the Bucks his entire career. He did win a title in 2021. So that might make him not quite as thirsty to ring chase as some other guys have been once they get to that stage of their careers. But the point is, he's not going to languish on a bad team for years just because he's a Milwaukee guy. That's just not the way it works with players of that stature in the NBA. I don't know that it's necessarily imminent in terms of him, issuing a trade request. Certainly the Bucks aren't going to force him out. They would make him sort of make the first move and leak that he wants to leave town. But the history of NBA superstars suggests that unless the Bucks turn things around, and it's tough for me to see a sustained turnaround when you look at the ages, the injuries, and the lack of assets they have to further improve their roster. And I think they're a second apron team too, so they're very limited financially in what they could do, even if they did have the assets. So I think, be it this trade deadline, next offseason, a year after that, at some point by the end of this decade, Giannis is going to be playing for a team that's not the Milwaukee Bucks. I would bet a decent amount of money on that. I don't know when it's going to happen, but at some point it just seems likely to, because superstars of that caliber typically don't play out the string on below 500 teams for their remaining prime years. They have so much power, they can get to a better situation. He's signed through at least 2027 player option that can take him through 2028. So it's not like the Bucks are desperate to do something now, or else they risk losing him for no compensation. But again, we've seen time and time again, players hold most of the power in the NBA. So there's going to come a point, most likely, that he asks out, and the Bucks will have more leverage if they trade him before the contract gets too close to its expiration. So while probably not this season, because there is a path to getting at least competitive in a bad Eastern Conference, I think at some point something is going to change there in Milwaukee. And it's also tough for them, even if they could make a big deal, which is difficult due to a lack of assets and a lack of financial flexibility. Milwaukee's a pretty small market to begin with anyway, so it's even tougher to sustain, the infrastructure for a star of Giannis's caliber for 10, 15, 20 years. That's just not in NBA history a market that typically sustains it for that long. So be it February 2025 trade deadline, 2025 offseason, or 26, at some point, barring a miraculous revival by Doc Rivers, and I don't see a lot in Doc's history that suggests he's going to be able to do that, there's going to be a point where Giannis and the Bucks decide that, honestly, for both of them, parting ways makes sense, because from Milwaukee's standpoint, other than the PR hit of losing, a franchise icon, at some point it would be better for them to try and retool and go a little bit younger when it's clear they've maxed out and don't have a path to building a contending roster around Giannis. So for a lot of reasons, I think it's more when than if. And should he hit the market? Look, this is what a team like the Rockets is stockpiling assets for. This is not just an all-star level player. This is a two-time MVP. This is, in my opinion, still a top 5, at worst, top 7 player in the world. And he's not even 30 years old until next month. So there's no imminent concerns of being washed or any major medical concerns or injuries that I know of. There's a ton to like here. This is the kind of guy, if you need to go all in, that you go all in on. This is why you stockpile assets. And it's noteworthy that Bill Simmons, as he looked at the entire landscape, pointed to Brooklyn and Houston as the two teams that he believes makes the most sense for Giannis, based on the combination of having the assets to satisfy Milwaukee, because they're not going to move him just to move him. And I don't think the situation is going to get too bitter based on their years together and having won a championship. I think they'd want to do right by him, but he would also want to do right by them and make sure that he's not leaving them in the dust. So in terms of a decent enough market size, chance to win, it has the assets, be it draft picks, young players, that Milwaukee can potentially build around moving forward, Simmons came to the conclusion that Brooklyn and Houston are the two that make the most sense. I'm sure other teams would try to get in the mix. You hear about these teams like Miami and Golden State and the Lakers all the time, but I just don't see them having the assets in terms of players, draft equity, financial flexibility to make that work. And so the Rockets are in a pretty good position here. I mean, the Thunder certainly have the assets, but I don't see, this is going to sound weird because the Thunder definitely have the assets, but I don't know if the Thunder, as good as they are, would part with the assets to be at the front of the line for Giannis, because unless you're including, Shea, Chet, maybe Jalen, they do have a lot of draft equity, but I don't think Milwaukee would take just a draft pick package. They would want some sort of proven commodity as a young player. So if OKC underachieves this year, they could get into the mix, but I don't really see OKC, that's the team that has all the obvious equity, but I don't really see them getting in the mix here. And then the other team with the equity, Utah, but I just don't see that being appealing to Giannis anytime soon for the obvious reasons. So, Paolo, do you agree with Simmons' framing that like Brooklyn and Houston theoretically make the most sense?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, who do you think? Okay, go.
I think we make a lot of sense, and I'm sure we'll talk about the we part of it.
Well, for different reasons. With Brooklyn, I think part of it is the market size and being able to
see. That's the thing. I don't see Giannis going. I mean, after spending this long in Milwaukee, I don't see him. If he were to sell out to a big market to the point that he demand a trade somewhere, I just don't see Brooklyn being it. I don't think that they are anywhere close to contention. They would need to spend the entire big package that they got for their stars to get Giannis, because they have no centerpiece. I don't know why you're including Cam Thomas, but if you include Cam Thomas, then what are you building around Giannis with? Do you have Claxton?
Yeah.
Can't play with him. So I think Giannis is one of the most fun hypotheticals to play out, because there's a lot of rules that we can set off the get-go that are pretty safe assumptions. The team's going to trade for him. It's not going to have a pick-and-roll big. Giannis has basically never played with a pick-and-roll big. Brook Lopez has been there their entire side. Their backup bigs are Bobby Portis, who, as you know, can shoot the ball. So I don't see it being a team that has a star or a very good non-shooting center. So that's why I throw Brooklyn out, because it's just too hard. They have a lot of assets, but they don't have that many assets.
Okay.
And they just traded to get their future back so they can tank. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to just turn the page to another 30-year-old superstar right off the gate. I don't think Brooklyn makes any sense. I would just throw that one out.
So
I think we make sense. And I actually disagree with you. I think the Thunder make a lot of sense.
You do? Okay. Explain.
And I'm really high on all of the Thunder's young players. I'm really, really high on Jalen Williams. Obviously, I don't think Shai's on the deal at all. I think Shai's actually more valuable than Giannis right now. I think he's obviously a lot younger. He's in his prime. He's a superstar level player. He was a 30-point per game player last season. He's a good defender. He's, your prototypical closer in the close game. I think he is the type of franchise player that every team is looking for, and he's at the prime of his career. I think Shai's untouchable in there. But I don't think the Thunder need to include both Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren to make a competitive Giannis trade package. And I think it makes, even though
it had to be at least one of them.
Yeah, obviously at least one of them. I think that they would rather have Jalen Williams be the centerpiece there for two reasons. First of all, he's more enticing to the Bucks because he has the potential to be a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander type player for them to be the centerpiece of the rebuild off the get-go, right? So I think he makes a lot of sense. He's young, obviously, and he has shown the ability to run team by himself with the second unit with the Thunder, and obviously is also able to play with Shai when they close games out. He was obviously, I think, a sixth man last year. And so I think they try to build a package around around Jalen Williams. Sorry, I think how many times have I confused his name?
It happened.
No, but sorry. I think they're going to make a package around Jalen Williams. And I think it makes a lot of sense for the Bucks because they get that centerpiece right away, and he's guaranteed to be good. And he's going to keep, if the Bucks are going to trade with a team like the Thunder, they're going to want to stay somewhat afloat because they have no protections on any of their picks up until 2028 or 2029. Yeah, Bucks, Pelicans, Blazers, even 2030, they still have a swap with the Blazers that isn't protected. So I don't think that they're going to want to flat out tank when they don't have any chance of keeping their picks top 4 protected. So I think Jalen Williams allows them to somewhat retool
on the fly. And I agree with you. That goes into why I think the Rockets are a potential fit for Giannis because they have the types of guys that can keep the Bucks afloat. Let me cut you off because I'll concede that the Thunder could have more of a path. Is there any other team besides the Thunder that jump out to you? Yes. You've already said not Brooklyn, that jumps out to you as a potential suitor.
I have one more. So just one last thing on the Thunder that I wanted to finish off with is Chet and Giannis just seem perfect.
I agree.
You can run them both as roamers. You can have Giannis battle the tougher physical bigs inside. Chet can obviously space on offense. It's an insanely good fit. I think they'd be, they could be a dynasty for 4 years. But moving on, my other team, it's kind of a combination of a team that's in a tough place combined with a team that has something that the Bucks really want for the next 4 years, which is the Pelicans. The Pelicans have the Bucks first round pick for this year, next year, the year after that, so until 2027, the next 3 years of picks. So they could pull a move like what Brooklyn did in combination to what the Rockets did. You get picks back and you tank for 3 years. You have 3 years to bottom out, and then you hope that in 3 years when you owe picks again, this time to the Blazers, you are in a good enough position that you aren't as hurt by those moves.
Are you trading Zion in this deal for Giannis?
Yeah, that's where what makes sense is, listen, Zion is good. He's injury prone. The Pelicans have not been able to make it work with him and Ingram. You call it quits. I think the Pelicans have wanted to do that for a bit. They play the same position, so the Pelicans can still go on to contend with CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, and now Giannis. It's not an ideal fit, but it's better than what you have. You change things around. And in exchange, the Bucks get Zion, who is injury prone. So if you want to tank, he's not really going to stop you. You could flip him to a third team for more picks, since you're getting your own picks back from the Pelicans for 3 years. I think they're pretty perfect partner for the Bucks in this case. And so I think Thunder and
the question is whether Giannis would want to go to New Orleans, but
exactly.
Yeah.
I think he could be. I think with the Thunder, the sell is pretty easy. I mean, he's been in a small market as a dark horse.
Yeah.
I don't think going to another one would hurt that much. With the Pelicans, it's a bit tougher. But maybe you can, and obviously the Dejounte Murray not being the best force spacer kind of hurts. But maybe you can sell him on, hey, this could be a forehead monster when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. You're gonna have to probably defend for 3 guys, but it's not unthinkable. And I think for the Bucks, it makes a lot of sense. It'd be a case of the Pelicans doing a good enough job convincing Giannis that they could be a fit. And then I actually think we are, and if we want to move to us, I think we are the third.
Yeah,
well, I think we're in contention. I think that they're clearly the best team, but I think we and the best fit for both parties. But I think we and the Pelicans could, be getting into a bidding war if the Thunder that aren't,
Well, and I think a lot of this is also going to come down to what Giannis wants and his comfort level behind the scenes, because I do think that both Giannis and the Bucks will want to do right by the other, as I said earlier. The reason I wanted to start by sort of laying out the landscape, I want to explain why, before we go into whether the Rockets should or shouldn't and what the considerations are, why I think it is much more likely to happen in the 2025 offseason than it is in February. I think when you look at the motivations for most of the entities at play, I think for Milwaukee, most of the mega deals involving superstars that aren't near the end of their contract or aren't like 35 years old in that range, and thus, every year is precious because they're close to being washed. Most of the deals happen in the off season because there are considerably more options. Obviously, more teams are willing to think big picture, potentially blow it up. And more importantly than that, just in terms of the mechanisms of a trade this large, Giannis making $50+ million a year as a max player, and he deserves that. It can be difficult to match salaries during the year because of the smaller roster sizes. So it can be difficult to aggregate salaries and do a 5-for-1, 6-for-2, 7-for-3, something of that nature, as opposed to when you can have up to 21 players in the offseason, it becomes much easier to sort of stack contracts together. It opens up more options around the league. So if you're Milwaukee and he's under contract through 2027, I don't see why, unless the offer is just beyond overwhelming, that you would rush into a deal at this season's trade deadline, especially in a bad East. I think it would have to be insanely off the rails to reach a point where they, as an organization, would want to move that quickly. He's under contract for at least 2 more years, and you have a pathway to at least being relevant in the East. And NBA history tells us that most of these trades, think, Paul George and Russell Westbrook in 2019, think Anthony Davis from the Pelicans to the Lakers in 2018, think Chris Paul from the Clippers to the Rockets in 2017. Most of these mega deals tend to happen about guys that are not at the very tail end of their careers or contracts. Up to the end of their contracts, there can be, an impetus to do a deal sooner rather than later for leverage purposes. But guys in the middle of their primes who have, multiple years in most cases left on their deals, the offseason just opens up more possibilities, both in terms of packages from other teams as well as the financial mechanisms. Also, just the draft equity. If you take Brooklyn as a suitor, which Simmons does, I know you don't. Look, it's always awkward if you do a draft deal during the season because one of Brooklyn's most valuable assets is their 2025 pick that they got back from the Rockets. Well, if you trade Giannis to Brooklyn, theoretically at the trade deadline, you're making that pick worse because Giannis would obviously make the team a lot better. So for a lot of reasons, it makes sense if you're the Bucks to try and delay it until the offseason. And I think for Giannis, I don't think any situation other than the Thunder would clearly get him into championship contention this year. And so because of that, and because of all of that trust equity he has with the players in Milwaukee, the organization, the fans, I don't see him rushing out and going from, at this point, he hasn't even asked for a trade, to trying to force it by this year's deadline and getting ugly or being willing to get ugly unless he sees a true path to a ring this year. Even the Rockets, they would be better with Giannis. Do I think the Rockets, with whatever you would have to give up to get him, would be better? They'd be better, but would they be good enough to win a title? Not this year. They're not to the Boston Celtics, OKC Thunder tier, even with Giannis. There would still be more development with Giannis. Whatever's left of the young core, the chemistry, you'd like to, have an offseason to go out and try and get the best role players to fit around him. That's also why, again, it makes sense to do bigger things in the offseason because you have a better chance to retool the roster around a player of that magnitude and try to optimize the roster to that player's skill sets because it's so rare to have a player of that stature. So for Giannis, I don't see any of the teams other than Oklahoma City being needle movers enough that he would say, you know what, I'm not comfortable waiting until the offseason. Let's do this now. And the final point, of all the teams you listed, and Simmons listed, OKC is the only one that I think realistically could have the trade package for Giannis and could win a championship this year with him. Yet, I don't think OKC, for much the same reasons I think the Rockets would want to wait until the 2025 offseason, I think the Thunder would as well. The ideal scenario for the Thunder is not trading for Giannis. The ideal scenario for the Rockets is, or for the Thunder, is winning a championship with the young core they have in place, with three guys that are in their low to mid 20s, and Jalen, Chet, and well, Shea's a little older than that. How old is he now? Looking this up, he's 26, so he's still in his mid 20s. The ideal scenario, so you have the longest contention window possible, is that you build a contender and a championship team organically. And so I think the Thunder want to give it at least one more run as is. Now, if they fall short, then yeah, they have the assets to certainly pivot to Giannis. But I think they want to wait until the offseason as well. So I think the Bucks definitely want to wait till the offseason. Giannis probably would, or at least he wouldn't see the upgrade as so clear amongst the teams involved that he would, push his chips to the table by February. The Thunder are perhaps the one exception, but I just don't think the Thunder would want to do it that soon. And so I think because of all of those reasons, it's likely to extend until the 2025 offseason at the earliest. And if that is the case, the Rockets, and this is where I've seen a lot of the early talk about Houston as a Giannis suitor misunderstood, the Rockets absolutely did the right thing extending Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. I've seen some talk saying, do the Rockets, and Simmons brought this up, and it was, quite frankly, completely off base, saying, the Rockets wouldn't be able to include Green or Sengun in the deal. Well, yeah, they couldn't this season, but I think part of the logic for Rafael Stone was looking at the trade market, not just Giannis, but any star player that could conceivably come available over the next few years. And I think the Rockets came to the conclusion that none of those guys was reasonably likely to be available by the 2025 trade deadline. And if they were, it wouldn't be a fit to the Rockets for one reason or another. And so if it's 2025 offseason or later, then by getting Green and Sengun to control deals, they have significantly more options. So the idea that, the Rockets should have waited, no. Restricted free agency, the theoretical cap flexibility does nothing. If Milwaukee trades Giannis, they're not going to want to trade him for cap space because guys of that stature don't move or anything close to that stature via free agency. It's by trade. If Milwaukee trades Giannis, it's because they are going to want to bring in impact players through that trade, building blocks like Zion from the Pelicans, potentially Jalen Williams from the Thunder, Sengun or Jalen Green from the Rockets, someone like that. It's not going to be about cap flexibility. And I've seen some suggest that, the Rockets could use Fred VanVleet as the financial vehicle, package Fred, multiple members of the young core and draft picks. Fred's not going to be that appealing to a post-Giannis Milwaukee. No, I think both for asset reasons and financial reasons, what makes the most sense is for Jalen Green or Alperen Sengun, most likely Sengun for the front court reasons you laid out, to be the primary piece going to Milwaukee. And you are in a much better position to execute that trade next offseason by doing the extension. If you let them hit restricted free agency, they are free agents. They are restricted, but they are not bound to go to Milwaukee just because you want them to. They would have to agree to a contract. They would have to agree to go there as a destination. Other teams could be involved in the bidding. There would be all sorts of unique sign and trade rules at play, timing considerations. By getting these deals done early with Sengun and Jalen, you have full control next offseason. You don't at the deadline because of base year compensation, the poison pill, all those provisions. It's very difficult, basically impossible. David Weiner laid it out in a blog post at ClutchFans. Go to clutchfans.net. You can read it. But basically, incoming salary, the Rockets, basically, it would count very little to them, their current salary, but it would count, as outgoing salary significantly more to the team acquiring them because obviously they would be acquiring them for the next few years. So it would be very difficult to make the salaries line up if both teams are above the salary cap because it would be like a $20+ million delta between, what the incoming salary for the other team is and the outgoing salary for the Rockets. So it makes, long story short, the first season of the contract, which is this season, the extended contract, or after the contract extension. Technically, the extension doesn't kick in until next season. But the point is, this season, because you did the extensions, they become almost untradeable. The Rockets were okay with that because they looked at the landscape and said, you know what, we don't think any of these possibilities are going to come to a head or make sense for us during this upcoming year. By next offseason, they could. And so because of that, it makes even more sense to do the extensions early as opposed to risk waiting until restricted free agency and bringing other teams into play, uncertainty with, the contracts at that time, potentially agreeing to a sign and trade, all these other variables. No, everything is controllable now. You know the salaries, you know the years, and the Rockets have full control. So no, the Rockets do not regret agreeing to these extensions based on the potential availability of Giannis. If anything, the potential availability of Giannis incentivized Rafael Stone more to do these deals in mid-October. So I want to clarify that off the top. I don't think the Rockets misread the market at all. I think they came to the conclusion that the 2025 offseason was the most likely time for a deal to make sense to them. I think it's true for most teams around the league. And so I think that's why Milwaukee and Giannis are likely to wait. And in that scenario, certainly it would take 2 or 3 members of your core 7 along with draft picks. You can get into specifics in a second, Paolo. But I think it would almost certainly be Sengun or Jalen, most likely Sengun because he's the most proven. Because what we've seen with these, comparable trades, and so I mentioned a couple of them. Anthony Davis, Pelicans to the Lakers. The Lakers sent back Brandon Ingram. Paul George from the Thunder to the Clippers. Clippers sent back SGA. And SGA wasn't a star at the time, but he had already proven a lot. Like he had already played starters level minutes in the NBA and looked like a very promising prospect. They didn't know he'd be an MVP, but they felt pretty good about it. Even Russell Westbrook to the Rockets. We talked about the draft picks the Rockets gave up. They also gave up Chris Paul, who was still close to his prime. So because of that, it can't just be about prospects and draft picks with theoretical upside. You need at least one player in the deal that has done it to scale. And that's where, people can mock counting stats all they want, but guys like Sengun and Jalen that have proven they can put up 20-plus points, in the case of Sengun, 20 and 10, while being the top option on the scouting report, while having their bodies hold up over 82 games at 30-plus minutes per night. They are the only 2 guys on the Rockets roster that can fit the bill. Maybe Tari Eason, if he explodes the next few months, he's out there now just because the sample is so small, missed most of last year. But if Tari Eason explodes, why the hell are you trading him? If Tari Eason looks like he's emerging into that type of player by the end of this season, why wouldn't you just keep him? I think the more likely scenario, it's Sengun or Jalen, very good players, or potentially very good players in Jalen's case, but ones with some alarming flaws. But yet, because they've done it to scale, could at least be something of a building block of some certainty for the Bucks moving forward. To me, that's where it makes sense for them financially and from an asset perspective. It can't all be just, roll the dice, future picks, and members of your young core that, let's say like the Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore tier, even to an extent, Amen Thompson and Jabari Smith Jr., who haven't done it at scale just yet. Guys that you feel sort of good about, and if you squint hard enough, you might like them as prospects, but they haven't really done it beyond 10, 15 minutes. No, there's a reason why most of these deals have someone coming back. It may be a little bit flawed. Nobody's saying Brandon Ingram is a superstar, but he had proven that he could be a high-usage, legit scorer in the NBA. That has value. And so that's why Sengun or Jalen are the 2 guys on the Rockets, most likely Sengun, that would have to be the foundation of a deal. Otherwise, just the comparable trades for guys that are that good at an all-star or better level, that are under contract for multiple seasons moving forward. So there's no force that's pushing the team to accept way below market value. So they have a lot of leverage. You've got to give up something of value. And so for the Rockets, when you look at the roster, Fred VanVleet might make it work financially. He's not going to make it work anywhere close from an asset perspective. At this point, it's Sengun or Jalen. They are not the Rockets' best prospects, but they can fit that role in a hypothetical star trade better than most of the others. So the bottom line is, if you want to use one of them in that way, how do you best have them available for that option should the right guy or opportunity present itself? To me, it's pretty clear that the extensions in October were the right way to maximize their value, especially when you look at the marketplace and the fact that, these negotiations are probably more likely to happen next summer than they are in February. So, Paolo, I know I've gone on for a while. I know you had some points you wanted to jump in before we got into the Rockets specifically, but I just wanted to lay out why I think, from Houston's standpoint, the extensions make even more sense now, not less.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you don't extend them, as you said, you can trade them next offseason. You can only sign and trade them, which leads me to the first point that I wanted to make on the Bucks and why I think, well, I do agree with you. I'd call it a 80-20, that if he is to get dealt, it's not this season, it's after, at the very least, the end of this season. The first one is the Bucks are really, really, really badly into the tax. They are paying currently nearly $75 million just this season for tax. This is without you add those $74 million to the salary, they're going to have a bill of $268 million for their roster this season, which would be the third most in the NBA, behind only the Suns, who are just out of this world, and the Timberwolves, because of their max contract. So from the Bucks perspective, which is what I wanted to get to, it might make more. They might want to trade them this season because they get to hopefully dot or lessen this enormous tax blow, and also because, since depending on the destination, they might want to still be somewhat contenders. They might value a deal where you're getting back expiring salary, while at the same time valuing the ability to use that salary that will expire at the end of the season as cap space the year after. So in a situation where they trade Giannis, they trade Lillard, or they keep Lillard, whatever the case may be, they would hold on. If Giannis's $55 million vanish, they could use that newfound space to build, not obviously a contender, but I think that's decent in case they don't deal with in case the Pelicans aren't involved and they want to remain somewhat good. So those are just two quick counterpoints that I would say that I think the Bucks are actually the only part of this entire imaginary hypothetical ordeal that might actually want to get sent sooner rather than later. I'm also not.
I would just be surprised, because they have spent aggressively to this point. It would take a total 180, which maybe they rack up enough losses to where they would be willing to do that. But it would just be an aggressive change in posture from ownership on down that, maybe it can happen quickly, but typically that tends to happen more over a span of months than a few weeks, especially in a bad East.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and usually these things don't happen this quick, but if they were to be objective, I think they have actually, out of the three parties, so the second team, Giannis and the Bucks, I think the Bucks have the most to gain from doing a deal sooner, and so that's why I said there may be an angle there. But then as far as, I wanted to also touch on the Bucks roster, just to reemphasize why they are on the verge of blowing it up. If not this season, I think next season, there's very little chance that this team holds itself together for more than just this season and halfway through next season. And they may give it another shot next season, but I think it goes poorly again. Mainly because Giannis is 30, Lillard's getting old. He's still very good, but he's getting older. Brook Lopez is old. Chris Middleton is old, washed, and injury prone. Bobby Portis is an offense-only player. Taurean Prince is on the low end of what a 3-and-D wing looks, what a 3-and-D could be. Gary Trent at this point he's never been great, but there was a point in his career where he was more of a defensive specialist who could shoot. Now he's a shooter who can somewhat play defense. Terrible. Obviously not good perimeter defense. Pat Connaughton, not a good defender. AJ Green, not a good defender. Then you're talking about Andre Jackson, DeLon Wright, who's an okay defender, and just a lot of guys that don't make the rotation. So this team's built out of a lot of shooting and terrible defense. And it doesn't work. They have all of the star power in the world, and it doesn't work. Even with Giannis there, he cannot defend for three people, or in some items for other people who are not good defenders. This makes it unsustainable for the Bucks, so I think they will have to trade them, because they're locked into a lot of these guys. I mean, Chris Middleton is not going anywhere. Lillard's not going anywhere. They're not good defenders at this point in their careers. And Gary Trent's not going anywhere. Bobby Portis not going anywhere anytime soon. It would be really hard to rebuild this team, especially because they are over the second apron. They can only trade for players cheaper than what they currently have. There's a lot of restrictions. You guys can check the CBA episode we did with David Wiener on that. So because of all of this, I think Giannis by next year's deadline tops is gone.
Yeah.
And so why did I want to establish this parallel? Because I think if we did this trade for Giannis, a lot of people would say that the first priority should be acquiring shooting. Acquiring shooting should be the main priority of this team regardless, because we need some shooting, but acquiring shooting at the expense of defense might not be the solution that a lot of people are looking at, are going to claim it is, because, well, look at this current team, right? Giannis is not going to get better as a defender from 30 on. I would say it's more likely that his defense slows down faster than what his offense does. And it has already happened up to this point. Giannis is not the switchable 1-5 monster roaming monster that he used to be. And so when formatting a trade or a series of trades, because obviously if you trade for Giannis, it's likely not done with just Giannis, especially with how many fitting pieces this team has that actually don't fit with him. I think what your next step is, well, how do we build a roster that's composed of what we currently have with Giannis? I think Sengun and Giannis cannot play together. Sengun could become a 37% shooter overnight on 2 attempts a game, still wouldn't be enough. Brook Lopez takes a lot of threes. Guys, he gets 5 attempts, on any given night, and he's a very good shooter for it. And so I don't think that works whatsoever. I think as Giannis slows on defensively, obviously he's going to be behaving more like a forward and less like a switchable big. So that also isn't great with Sengun. Listen, if you trade for Giannis, I just don't think it works. They operate in the same spaces offensively. They are going to end up operating similar spaces defensively as well. It just doesn't make sense. And Sengun's probably the guy that the Bucks would want the most, considering that if they are trading with us, they're going to want to remain competitive.
Yeah, I mentioned the floor, and to this point, his floor is a lot higher than Jalen. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you have to take into account is it's very likely that, just like what the Brooklyn Nets did, that the Bucks will want to have the Pelicans within the negotiations and say, hey, if the centerpiece goes to you,
good point,
can I get my picks back? And well, actually, Sengun would be a pretty good fit with Ingram. He would be a pretty good fit with CJ McCollum. He'd be an okay fit with DeJounte Murray if you use them as more of a dribble handoff type of guard. He obviously doesn't fit with Zion, but if the Pelicans are acquiring another star, I doubt that Zion is probably the odd man out, because they've been rumored to be wanting to move him for a while. And so even in that scenario, Sengun's the one that makes the most sense. But I don't think Sengun's enough. And I struggle to see a world where Giannis and Amen can coexist. And that's a tough conversation to have. But considering how better of a fit they would be together, and I know we've spent years saying that you don't trade long-term upside for short-term payoff.
Yeah.
Fit, exactly. But at that point, when you're trading for an MVP candidate at 30 years old, that's likely going to be, an MVP. I think he'll be an MVP candidate at least until he's 34. He's just that type of physical, beast.
Yeah.
I think it might make, and I've been loving watching Amen, but I think it might make sense to include Sengun and Amen if that means you can save on what you give up picks wise. Because if you're starting with Sengun and Amen, you're already in a, I think you're already kind of, from the known quantity standpoint, you're knocking out of the park basically any other offer anyone in the league could give.
Well, and also, if you're acquiring Giannis on a max deal in his 30s, I mean, he's the ultimate super max type of player. By the end of his contract, he's going to be into the 60s, 70s in terms of annual value for him. So that's going to be an expensive team. And so you would need those picks potentially to find cheap role players in the years ahead, because of how expensive that overall team would be based on having a true super max player. So that's the argument that you could make on that front, to sort of pay a little bit more on the front end to save picks that could give you potentially cheap role players to build out the roster in the years ahead. Look, I think clearly the Rockets could make a competitive offer if they wanted to. And I wanted to lead off by sort of explaining the timing dynamics, because for the reasons we laid out, I don't see a deal making sense for most of the parties involved until at least the next offseason. And also you mentioned, I do agree with your framing that even if you don't typically sacrifice long-term upside for fit, if we're talking about a top 5 to 10 player in the world, that's a rare enough opportunity where you might actually do that, because if you're going to give up that much financially in terms of prospect cost, assets, to basically make him the face of your franchise, then yeah, you need to do everything you can to maximize that window, give him what he needs to succeed. And so it's different than just a very abstract sense. And it's the same reason why, again, I think the Bucks would be incentivized, at least from an asset standpoint. I understand your points about the finances and the taxes of it all, but from an asset standpoint, you wait until the offseason, you're much more likely to have more teams in the bidding, because you can actually, at that point, do more things to reshape your roster. And then, of course, you can have a full training camp offseason to sort of develop chemistry and put it all together, graduate it in the right way, as opposed to trying to do it all on the fly in February. And so because of that, there's going to be more teams, in my opinion, in the running, because you can potentially build out the infrastructure in the right way. It only makes sense to do a deal at the deadline in one of two scenarios. Either, a team is so ready and the talent is so overwhelming, like if Oklahoma City decided to do it this year and included Jalen or Chet, and the Bucks just couldn't turn it down, and Giannis couldn't turn it down because, he can win a championship this year, then whatever, that's fine. Or if the organization just decided to go cheap and do it strictly for financial and tax-saving reasons, I guess. But from an asset standpoint, it makes sense to wait until the offseason. And so if that happens, 2025 offseason or later, the Rockets will be players because, Sengun and Jalen will both be fully eligible to be dealt at that time, and would make sense both from the financial standpoint as well as the asset standpoint, in a way that, putting together a deal right now with Fred VanVleet as a financial vehicle just would not make sense, even if obviously he would not be an asset to the Bucks. It would have to be Fred plus, a huge combination of prospects and picks. So Rockets could definitely get in the bidding. And I agree with you. If they included both Sengun and Amen, it's tough to see any team, based on what we know now of those prospects, meeting the offer. The question for me is whether they should. And that's another reason why I think, besides the Bucks wanting to wait until at least the 2025 off seasons for the reasons that I laid out, I also think the Rockets, similar to the Thunder, would prefer waiting organizationally until the 2025 off season. Besides the fact that it's easier at that point because of the extensions, I also think that gives the Rockets more time themselves to learn more information about the upside of this team. Because just as I don't think the Thunder would want to rush into a deal, they would prefer to organically build a contender themselves, so would the Rockets. You mentioned leading off the pod, and we need to wind down because I know we're well over an hour now. But look, the Rockets are on a 52-win pace. Do I expect that to continue? Not necessarily. I mean, they have had a fairly friendly schedule to this point. But if the Rockets somehow this year end up winning 50-plus games and at least a playoff series, and Sengun looks like a bona fide all-star, that would make me, I wouldn't say I would never do it, but it would make me more cautious for sure. As opposed to, if it's the other end of the spectrum, and I mentioned I don't think that that's a reasonable expectation anymore, but if the Rockets, don't take a step forward and they're mired in mediocrity at around 500 in a tough West, then yeah, that's the scenario where you just get it done no matter what, because you need the stimulus of a player like Giannis to lift you out of the, middle of the pack purgatory, the mediocrity treadmill, if you will. And so where it gets dicey for me is if it's the middle ground. If it's like, mid to upper 40s and you get into, let's say, the play-in tournament, maybe you sneak into the playoffs, that's where I'm sort of on the fence, where there's clearly a step forward, but just how much of a step is it? That's where I think the conversations would be most difficult for Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka. The way I see the framing, if you underachieve this year, then whatever, it's worth it because you need to get out at that point of the mediocrity treadmill. Something is going wrong in terms of just building it organically. But there's also a world where if you outperform, just as I don't think the Thunder in a perfect world would trade for Giannis because they just build a championship team organically, I think the same would be true with the Rockets if it looks like they were able to build it just with the core seven and having the right role players around them and so on and so forth. I think it's the middle ground where, they're on the right trajectory, but they're still not to the point of winning a playoff series or even close to the level of the Thunder, where I think you get into these dicey scenarios where you sort of see the path, but, it would make you a little bit nervous because you do see growth internally and at least a chance that the internal organic development plan could work out. So what are your thoughts, Paulo, I guess, on the balance there? Do you agree with that general framing in that it's not that if you win 50-plus games in the playoff series that you would never trade for Giannis, but it would make me more reluctant. It might make it to where I wouldn't trade both Sengun and Amen, and at that point, the Rockets might get outbid. And if it's a 40-win season, assuming it's not due to, widespread injuries, and maybe if it is, depending on exactly who it's to, then yeah, I would be super aggressive and say, you know what, they've just got to get that star player and worry about the rest later. They need the stimulus. And then if it's in the middle ground, that's where I'm sort of on the fence. And depending on exactly how the season plays out, does it look like Tari can legitimately be Kawhi Leonard as, Ime Udoka threw out that comp again after Monday's game? Do you have the guys internally that can potentially make it work? At that point, it's not just about the collective, but about the trajectory of certain individual prospects. Where do you sort of fall in, Paolo, on the scale of not just can they do it, because I think we both agree that they can, but should they do it?
Yeah, so it's actually a tougher question than I expected, because I started thinking about this a week ago and how everything looked like back then and how it looks like now. It's quite different. If Jalen looks like by the end of the season, like he is going to be a star, or rather than what looks like this season, a much better defender, but not that much better of an offensive player, and his catch and shoot numbers, especially playing with a guy like Giannis, stand out even more. If Jalen's not looking like a star player, that I think I may have to decline, because a lot of it hinges on Jalen Green being able to be the second offensive weapon on the team, right? You have Giannis, right? You're probably going to be trading for the center that can play with him, but maybe you run Jabari at the 5 and you try to work the spacing out that way. But now, after trading Amen and Sengun, who are two of your, I think, best performing players this season, now you have Giannis, who's a 30-year-old star, but you're hoping that Jalen, Cam, Reed Shepard, and Jabari Smith Jr. become who we think that they can become, and which is what the Rockets are hoping to do right now. And so you're shortening your margin, but you're maintaining a lot of the same questions. And so that's why, to me, it becomes a really tough ask, unless you just completely renew the team. Maybe you keep Tari Eason, because I don't think. Listen, I'll say right now, it's a hot take. People can clip this whenever they want. I would not involve Tari Eason in a trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. If we're trading for a star to win now, we need Tari Eason to win now. To me, he's going to contribute more than what any team would value him as.
Yes, that's the discrepancy. That's what I want to hit home, and I agree with you on that point. It's not so much that Tari is untouchable as a player. It's that he is just much more likely to be of significantly greater value to the Rockets than what he would likely be to the other team in a trade, to where it just wouldn't make sense.
Yes, exactly. So going back to the point, you would have, maybe if you traded for more experienced pieces, you'd have Giannis, you'd have Tari, maybe you keep Reed and Whitmore and you use Jalen and Jabari plus picks to try and get some other names around. But at that point, are you really building something sustainable, right? And it's the goal of the rebuild is never about getting back to contention. To me, it's about getting back to contention sustainably, right?
Right.
We weren't bad for 3 to 4 years, depending on how you feel about last season, hoping to be good for 1 or 2 seasons by going all out and trading for the superstar again, right? And unless you can do it sustainably, and unless maybe you have other deals lined up, maybe there's another young star that becomes tradable. Maybe it's Devin Booker. Maybe you compare Giannis. Maybe you trade for Giannis with Sengun and Amen and a couple of picks of your own picks, and then the Suns blow it up, although they're 8-2, doesn't look like it, likely. And maybe the Suns blow it up, and you're looking at, okay, we can pair up Giannis, and we can use the Suns picks plus Jalen Green plus Jabari Smith with the Suns and bring in Booker, and now we have Giannis, Booker, Reed Shepard, and Tari Eason. And now, yes, we're going to be very, very, very good right now. We still have some upside with Reed Shepard, some upside with Tari Eason, but we are going to be really freaking good now. In that kind of scenario, maybe, but if you're going to try to play both sides, unless Jalen Green trends upwards again, by the end of the season and is looking like a star player, which he's looking like a good player, but not a star player right now. If those guys, and him and Jabari especially, don't look much better, I'm not willing to mortgage what is our safe young talent for elite older talent until because there's real scenarios where Jalen doesn't pan out, Jabari doesn't pan out, and we build a team around Sengun and Tari Eason, and Amen Thompson's a big part of that. And so because of that, because of those scenarios, I'm not willing to go all in on a guy like Giannis, because the cost is going to be obviously some of our safer prospects. But the one thing that I would add is I'm not confident that the Rockets would think the same way that I do. Because, listen, how are you going to tell Tillman Fertitta that you have a chance to go get Giannis, and you're not going to because of this really nuanced, kind of thought process that I kind of just
sustainability as your marketing tagline. Yeah.
And besides that, listen, there's no guarantee that what I'm saying is correct, right? It's when you have the ability to bring in I think Giannis is still in his prime, a MVP caliber guy, still in his prime, that you think is going to be an MVP caliber guy at least through the next 4 years, which I think is a cycle in the NBA is 4 years. For the next 4 years, it's really tough to turn it down, and maybe you trust your ability to move more pieces if you see that Giannis came in and he's
right
and he's doing well, but the rest of the team isn't, then you trust yourself to shuffle more pieces. But what you're doing at that point is, the more wrong you get it the more wrong it looks through your first series of moves, the less leverage you have for your moves afterwards. That's why it's what these transformations are good to be are supposed to be done during the off season, because, well, nobody's seeing the team play in real time, and so there's no panic. You're not losing leverage. You can move a lot, you can make a lot of change at once, and you're not really losing or gaining much leverage because the product on the floor is not getting better or worse. If you're doing this and you're having games being played in between, even if you do one of the moves at the beginning of the season and then at the trade deadline you're trying to make more moves, you're going to bleed out value because you decided to wait. So it's really intriguing. I think Giannis is one of the players. Listen, I'm completely out on trading for Jimmy Butler. I was completely out on a Paul George move. I'm completely out on trading for anybody over the third.
AD.
I'll even lock it at 30. I'm pretty out on trading for anybody over 30, except for an MVP candidate. So I think if you have a chance to do that, trying to win, which is what the Rockets are trying to do, you have to at least consider it.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see both sides.
I mostly agree with your sustainability framing. I just think there's a world where if they underachieve enough this year, it's not that the logic would change. It's more if no one takes a clear step forward, and I don't think that's likely to happen based on what we've seen to this point, but, there is 70 games or so still left, so we have to keep an open mind. 85% of the sample is still out there. If nobody takes a clear step forward other than, I guess Tari is no matter what at this point, or I don't know, worst case scenario, maybe he gets hurt again. It's not that I would do the trade, go aggressively after Giannis, because I think that's the right path to sustainability. It's more if things are going poorly enough, like you mentioned Jalen, Jabari not taking a step, then I might want to try the door number 2, which is not just, the immediate stimulus, as I called it, of Giannis, but then having a player like Giannis on your team, how desirable he then makes you to other players around the league, and thus continuing to build, having a better path to putting together a championship roster that way, as opposed to the organic development. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't want that to happen. I just want to clarify. That's the one scenario where if they truly do, I don't want to say bottom out, but let's just say another 41-41, 40-42, 11th or 12th in the West, nobody is clearly at a higher tier to end this season than what they began it, then at that point, it's not so much that philosophically, I would disagree with what you're saying. It's more just, hey, the situation at that point would be so uncertain here that I could be tempted to say, you know what, let's just if we have the opportunity, and all of this is conditional on Giannis being open to coming here, in that scenario, maybe he's not even that open to coming to Houston because they're still at 500. So that may take care of it in and of itself. But if theoretically he was open to coming to Houston and Ime Udoka could get him to buy in, then at that point I might say, you know what, let's just get the MVP candidate in here, see what else happens with the rest of the roster, other opportunities in the months, years ahead to put the right players around him. And that is more appealing than the status quo. I don't think that's going to happen. I've seen enough already that I like the chances of multiple prospects on the core 7 developing to where that scenario is not going to happen. That's just the one pushback that I would give to sort of your sustainability analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It's
unlikely to happen, but I just wanted to add that one sort of asterisk to it.
Yeah, and I think my opinion on it will change throughout the year as guys' stocks go up and down. I think if, as I said before, I think if Cleveland turns to be a 24, 24, 5 and 4 on 58% true shooting by the end of the season, then I may be looking at this differently.
Sure.
But right now, man, maybe that's recency bias. Alperen Sengun is our only, him and Tari Eason, obviously I said Tari Eason's not traded, is our only known quantity at this point. Even Amen Thompson, he's been really good, but because he doesn't shoot, it's always going to be...
And if that's the case and nobody else takes a clear step forward this year, then I think the likely scenario is that you end up somewhere in the 45 to 48 win range, which is sort of in that middle ground where, there's compelling arguments both ways. And I think that's probably where the Rockets are likely to end up, and that's what could make this such a contentious point of debate next summer.
And at the same time, I think a lot of people, if that's the case, that they win 45 to 48 this season, or I think probably if they win a little bit less, a lot of people are going to be saying, oh, stay the course and see how it goes with another year of development. But I will say, in rebuilds, getting to the door but not in the door.
It's easy to plateau.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, with young players especially, listen, there was a big push last season to get better. And there was the payoff to that push, which was the win total also was a lot bigger. This season, there's another big push to get better, and the payoff for that getting better has to be playoffs. If you don't get there, it's easy for it to trail off, and there's examples of this in very recent history. I mean, look at what happened with the Pelicans. The Pelicans were on the way up. They didn't crack all the way in. They didn't get through the door, and they fell off again.
Yeah.
With young teams, it's easy through injury.
And then you add in some ill-timed injuries like they've had this year and go off the rails quickly.
So if it's not, you can't expect the development to be linear, and you can expect the status quo to maintain itself from one season to the other, because mentality plays a big factor into what is a very long 82-game season. And so if they're going to be moves made to win now if they don't get to the playoffs this season, regardless. So staying the course isn't really, I don't think it would be really in consideration if that happened.
Yeah, and one quick point on the Pelicans, who you threw out as potential suitor earlier, with Zion having multiple injuries early in the year, now a 4 to 6 week hamstring, it looks like. That's another reason why I think the Bucks, from an asset perspective at least, would be incentivized to wait, because I don't see a world by February where you feel comfortable, if you're the Bucks, taking Zion as a centerpiece until he proves he can at least stay healthy for longer than 20 games or so, which is probably going to be all that's left by the time he actually comes back from this hamstring injury. So that's another reason why, if he's in play because of those picks and, New Orleans being uniquely valuable to Milwaukee for that reason, then that's even more a reason to string it out and see if Zion can actually take his body seriously and stay on the court. Anyway, to close the loop, the one bow I'll put on it and the happy face, I think both you and I are in agreement, and I think Oklahoma City would feel the same way, most of their fans. The ideal scenario is that you don't have to trade for it. The ideal scenario, we're talking about it because it's interesting, it's, a fascinating possibility, but nothing will make me happier than the Rockets to continue on, the 52-win pace, maybe even get a little bit better if the shooting picks up. And they just develop a contender organically, because look, Giannis will be 31 years old next season. You'd be looking at a window, if his remaining prime years, I know people can point to LeBron now, but until proven otherwise, I think he's an outlier. I think realistically, you have to look at 35 as sort of the cutoff point for when guys are still reasonably in their prime. The ideal scenario is you build an organic contender. We've already sort of grown attached to these players, but also because they're in their low to mid-20s, you could have a sustainable contender for 10, 15 years, as opposed to, shortening your window to most likely 4 or 5 years because of the aging curve with Giannis and the assets you'd have to give up to bring him in. The ideal scenario would be you having enough as is, and Ime Udoka developing these guys in the right way to where you don't have to make a trade like that. And I think the same is true with Oklahoma City. That's why I don't think they push in the chips at this year's trade deadline, because they have enough hopes that SGA, Chet, and Jalen can develop into, the core three of a championship team as is, and then you can use all those future draft picks that they've got to build out the right role players around them for cheap as the roster gets more expensive. So that's the way. Is there anything I'm off base with in that analysis? Because, as much as it's fun to talk about Giannis, in a perfect world, I don't want them to trade for him. In a perfect world, I want this team to work out well enough as is that you don't have to. To me, that's the optimal scenario, right?
Yeah, I'm confident enough in the current state of the team that ideally everything stays the same.
Yeah, there's at least
Giannis stays on the Bucks. But a big part of the reason why you will trade for Giannis is to keep him from... Basically, what you're saying is boils down to... One of the biggest reasons to trade for Giannis is to keep him from going to another West contender. Because if he goes to the Thunder, for example, in the framework that I said, I don't think anybody's beating the Thunder for 3 years unless a big injury happens. I mean, how do you beat Shea and then a defense led by Giannis and Chet Holmgren that, they just fit perfectly together both on offense and on defense? I think they really have... Because if you're including Jalen Williams and a bunch of picks and the role players that they already have with Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso, all the guys that they already have, I think at that point, I don't think the Thunder will need to spend all of their assets to bring Giannis in when they're already giving up Jalen Williams. And so I think they're looking at that team that's absolutely stacked, and they still have assets to, shore up any difficulties that they may have. I think that's, big reason why you should trade for Giannis is if that happens, you're not going past the Western Conference Finals.
Block the Thunder.
Yeah, I think it's a Warriors type of thing. I think it's that level of that much better than the rest of the league, just because, and mostly because the rest of the league is not really convincing to me right now. And the two teams that look somewhat threatening in the Cavs and the Celtics are on the other conference.
Fair. And I think, the way to tie all of this together is that's another reason why I think most of the parties involved in this are going to be inclined to wait until at least next offseason, because there's so many layers to it that the more information you can get on certainly your own team, but also the landscape of the league, what the other options are, it would be a lot for someone to push their chips to the middle of the table for what would make sense for Giannis with 3 seasons left on his contract, for it to make sense for the Bucks and for the team giving up everything for it to make sense to them. So yeah, for all of it, we don't even have to unless new information leaks. That's part of why I went so long tonight. This can be sort of our Giannis FAQs episode. So where if people want to know what we think of the state of play, what the considerations are, you can refer back to this in your Loggerline archives. Because I really think unless something shocking happens with the Bucks or some other team being so insanely desperate that they just do something extremely unforeseen, this is going to be shelved until at least next off season, because it benefits so many of the people involved, to the player and team to have more options, have more suitors, and for the teams involved to get more information. And so Rockets can see how their guys developing and also see, just how the Thunder look. Are they incentivized to make a move? Maybe. One last point I'll get in. We've gone on long enough that anybody still listening is a diehard. If the Rockets don't want the Thunder to get Giannis, but they want the door to be open themselves, in a weird way, would it be beneficial to the Rockets if the Thunder win the championship this year? Because in that scenario, the Thunder would be less likely to go after him if they, make it work with SGA, Chet, and Jalen. So in this scenario where the main thing you're worried about, or one of the main things, is Thunder potentially becoming, last decade's Warriors, in some ways, if you're sort of in that uncertain ground and you're the Rockets, does it maybe benefit you to just let the Thunder win a championship as is? Do you see where I'm going with that?
I think it makes sense, but if that happened...
Giannis might KD his way to the...
Yeah. I think at that point, they may get Giannis and keep Jalen Williams. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah, super team. Yeah. And always F the Thunder. I kid mostly, but...
In fact, one of my earliest memories as a Rockets fan is just random moments from the regular season that I have in my mind is a game against the Thunder where we lost, the weird Western Conference race where we lost to the Thunder on a buzzer beater by Paul George.
Oh, yeah.
And that had massive seeding implications.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my...
I've always had some bitterness. One of the stupidest fights I've ever been in. So during the 2020 bubble playoffs, remember when Russ had the quad injury and the Rockets were being cagey about his status?
Yes.
Yeah, and he came back during that Rockets-Thunder first-round series, and I was pointing out, and you know me, I do this all across sports. I hate when teams are unnecessarily cagey for no reason with injuries. Like, they think it's gamesmanship. It's really not. It's just being, a dick to your fans for no real reason. It's all, it's all in their heads that theoretically, we could make the other team, waste time planning. 99% of the time, I would say it's all nonsense. But because there are rules that they can exploit, they do. And so the Rockets were very, cagey for when he would come back with that quad injury. And of course, even though Russ was on the Rockets at that time, Thunder fans loved him from all of his years, including the MVP season in Oklahoma City. And so when I would make the argument, again, not too dissimilar to what I've said in recent days with the Texans being way too cautious with Nico Collins and sort of playing it fast and loose with the activation and hyping people up, thinking he can return other than to be conservative in the end and holding him out longer. I forget exactly what I said, but the Thunder fan base took it to where I was questioning Russell Westbrook's desire to play. And that had nothing to do with it. I was not questioning Russ's desire to play, his willingness, his heart. I was, to a Rockets audience, throwing shade at, the Rockets and Mike D'Antoni for unnecessarily being, too secretive when we just want to know what the hell is going on and, what to expect. And I had pretty much all of Oklahoma City Twitter on my neck defending Russ, who was a Rockets player, thinking that I was attacking Russ. And it was the dumbest fight I've ever been in because, again, I wasn't even accusing Russ of not wanting to play or doing anything wrong. I was accusing the Rockets, but you know how Twitter is. People take one thing out of context, and before you know it, the narrative takes on a life of its own, even if it's not what you meant. But yeah, ever since then, I've just had some hard feelings towards Thunder fans. It's like, seriously, like all these guys come at me, and it's literally not even the point I was making in the slightest. Russ wanted to play. He just couldn't.
One of my earliest memories from sports Twitter in the US was I've always been a Russ hater. Just one of my least favorite players probably ever. Just the epitome of what I don't like about basketball, going for the flashy play, being inefficient, choking in the playoffs, the entire drama with the 17 MVP, his fans being so obnoxious. One of my earliest memories on Twitter was just, I was random 100 followers account and I was shitting on Russ because that was a random tirade that I went on, and random 100 follower account was getting flooded by Russ fans, replying Russ fans on the DMs. Listen, Jesus Christ, just toxic.
Yeah, it's a unique fan base, and some of it's not their fault. It's one of those things, like, especially when you're the only game in town or the only pro game, then it's different than cities like Houston where there are some Rockets-only stands, but for the most part, people sort of go back and forth between the Rockets, the Texans, the Astros, and other interests. These smaller markets like the Thunder and the Spurs, where there's not another pro game in the same market, those fans can be a lot more intense because their lives, 24/7, 365, surround that NBA franchise in a way that a lot of the fans, at least the more casual fans, aren't quite the same way in fan bases like ours in Houston. So I get it. Anyway, we've gone on long enough, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think there's going to be plenty of time in the months and perhaps years ahead to debate this possibility, and we can certainly revise our opinions based on further information, both for the Rockets and other teams. Anyway, it's gone on long enough now. We'll wrap it before 2 hours at least. We did it. I was worried about knowing what we wanted to cover today that we might have 2, but we at least kept it below that, so I will shut up now and get ready for tonight's game at Toyota Center between the Rockets and the Clippers. And I promise you, when we come back in a week or so, we'll be talking much more micro. Wanted to do the longer form Giannis discussion because it's becoming, with the Bucks losses mounting, it's becoming more and more of a talking point nationally. Rockets are at least in the conversation, so it'd be foolish not to at least address the possibility off the top. And then, we'll see how things develop over the coming weeks, months, and even years as to whether it becomes more realistic. Anyway, until that next show, which will be much more on-court focused, we will wrap it for now. If you want more content before that next show, the best place, as always, to get it is online, where you can follow me on Twitter /X @BenDuBose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and this show at The Logger Line. And of course, if you go to the Logger Line's page, you can find our link tree, which has links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice. We would certainly appreciate that. Also, in that same link tree, you've got links to our friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links, and you can enjoy their content as well. So, with those plugs complete, we will adjourn it right here. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.